scare you, no evil thing will. To see her is to take a sudden chill. Cruella, Cruella, the curl of her lips.
Hot buttered toast. I'm still at the same location, and some ladies have just joined to probably have a conversation. Hopefully they don't talk too loud. Okay, so we're going to read Hot Buttered Toast. And it was interrupted from my last chapter, but I will fix that when I get it home. Hot Buttered Toast. It was wonderful how quickly the spaniel took in the story that Mrs. poured out to him, for he had not heard any news by way of the twilight barking. "Haven't listened to it for years," he said. "Indeed, I doubt if I could get it now. There isn't another dog for miles. Anyway, Sir Charles needs me at twilight. He needs me almost all the time. I'm only off duty now because he's in his bath." They were now in a large stone-floored kitchen where the spaniel had led Mrs. after inviting her to jump in through the window. He went on, "Breakfast before you tell me any more, young lady," and he led her to a large plate of meat. "But it's your breakfast," said Mrs., trying not to look as hungry as she felt. "No, it isn't. It's my supper, if you really want to know. I'd no appetite, and I shan't have any for breakfast, which will be served to me any minute. Tea's my meal. Hurry up, my dear. It'll be thrown away if you don't eat it." Mrs. took one delicious gulp, then she stopped. "My husband," the spaniel interrupted her. "We'll see about his breakfast later. First, finish it all, my child." So Mrs. ate, and then had a long drink from a white pottery bowl. She had never seen a bowl like it. "There's an 18th century dog's drinking bowl," said the spaniel, "handed down from dog to dog in this family. And now, before you get too sleepy, you'd better bring your husband here." "Oh, yes," said Mrs. eagerly. "Please tell me how to get back to the haystack." "Just go to the end of the drive and turn left." "I'm not very good at right and left," said Mrs., "especially left." The spaniel smiled and looked at her paws. "This will help you," he said. "The paw with the pretty spot, that's your right paw." "But then which is my left paw?" "Why, it's the other paw, of course." "Back or front?" asked Mrs. "Just forget your back paws." Mrs. was puzzled. Could she forget her back paws? And if she could, would it be safe? The spaniel went on. "Look at your front paws and remember, right paw spot, left paw no spot." Mrs. stared hard at her paws. "I will practice," she said earnestly, "but please tell me how to turn left." "Turn on the side of the paw which does not have a spot." "Whichever way I'm going?" "Certainly," said the spaniel. "The paw with the spot will always be your right paw. You can depend on that." "If I turned towards you now, I would be turning left?" asked Mrs., after thinking very hard. Yes, splendid," said the spaniel. Mrs. turned around and faced the other way. "But now you are on the side of the paw with the spot," she said worriedly. "So my right paw has now turned into my left?" The spaniel gave up. "I will show you the haystack," he said, and led her out through what must have been a fine kitchen garden, but was now a mass of weeds. Beyond it were the fields. Mrs. could just see the thatched cottages and the haystack. "It's the only haystack," said the spaniel, "all the same. Keep your eyes on it all the time as you run. I would come with you, but my rheumatism prevents me, and Sir Charles will need me to carry his spectacle case downstairs. We are an old couple, my dear. He is 90, and I, according to foolish human reckoning, that 1 year of a dog's life represents 7 years of a human life, I'm 105. "I should never have guessed it," said Mrs. politely and truthfully. "Anyway, I'm still young enough to know a pretty dog when I see one," said the spaniel gallantly. "Now off you go to your husband. You'll have no difficulty finding your way back because you will see the chimneys from the haystack." "Right or left?" asked Mrs. brightly. "In front of your delightful nose. If I'm not here, just take your husband into the kitchen and I'll join you as soon as I can." Mrs. raced off happily across the frosty field, not taking her eyes off the haystack, and feeling very proud when she reached it without getting lost. Pongo was still heavily asleep, with the bread and butter by his nose. Poor Pongo. Waking up was awful, what with his sleepiness and the pain in his leg and his horror learning that Mrs. had been dashing about the countryside alone. But he felt better when she had told him the news. When she did, he ate the bread and butter. And though his leg hurt, he found that he could run without limping. "Which way do we go?" he asked, as they came out of the haystack. Mrs. looked worried. There were no chimneys ahead of her nose, because she was facing exactly the opposite direction. But Pongo saw the chimneys and took her towards them. Just before reaching the kitchen garden, Mrs. said, "Pongo, do dogs have spots on their right paws or their left paws?" "That depends on the dog," said Pongo. Mrs. shook her head. "It's hopeless," she thought. "How can I depend on a thing that depends?" The spaniel was waiting for them. "I've settled Sir Charles by the fire," he said, "so I have an hour or so to spare. Come to breakfast, my dear fellow." He led Pongo to the kitchen, where there was now another plate of food. "Surely it's your breakfast, sir," said Pongo. "Had mine with Sir Charles. Don't as a rule take breakfast, but meeting your pretty wife gave me an appetite, so I accepted a couple slices of bacon." Sir Charles was so pleased. "Go ahead, my dear chap. I couldn't eat another bite." So Pongo ate, and drank, and now for a long sleep, said the spaniel. He led them back up the staircase along the many passages until they came to a large sunny bedroom, in which was a 4-poster bed. Beside it was a round basket. "Mine," said the spaniel, "but I never use it. Sir Charles likes me on the bed. Luckily, that's made already, because John, he's our valet, is already off for the day, or his day out. Jump up, both of you." Pongo and Mrs. jumped up to the 4-poster and relaxed in bliss. "No one will come up here until this evening," said the spaniel, "but Sir Charles can't manage the stairs until John gets back. The fire should last some hours yet. We always light it for Sir Charles to have his bath in front of it. Newfangled plumbing in this house? Oh, no newfangled plumbing in this house. Sleep well, my children." The sunlight, the firelight, and the tapestried walls were all so beautiful that it seemed a waste not to stay awake and enjoy them. So they did, for nearly a whole minute. The next thing they knew, the spaniel was gently waking them. The sun was already down, the fire dead, the room a little chilly. Pongo and Mrs. stretched sleepily. "What you need is tea," said the spaniel, "but first a breath of air. Follow me." There was still a faint glow of light from the sunset as they wandered around the wintry, tangled garden. As Pongo looked back towards the beautiful old red brick house, the spaniel told them it was 400 years old, and that nobody now lived there but himself, Sir Charles, and the valet John. Most of the rooms were shut up. "But we dust them sometimes," he said. "That's a very long walk for me." The great window was lit by a flicker of firelight. "It's in there we sit mostly," the spaniel told him. "We should be warmer in one of the smaller rooms, but Sir Charles likes to be in the great hall." A silvery bell tinkled, and "There, he's ringing for me. Tea's ready. Now do just what I tell you." He led them indoors and then into a large high room, at the far end of which was an enormous fire. In front of it sat an old gentleman, but they could not yet see him very well because there was a screen around the back of the chair. "Please lie down in the back of the screen," whispered the spaniel. "Later Sir Charles will fall asleep and you can come closer to the fire." As Pongo and Mrs. tiptoed to the back of the screen, move you a little bit closer here. There we go. As Pongo and Mrs. tiptoed to the back of the screen, they noticed that there was a large table beside Sir Charles, on which was his luncheon tray, finished with now and neatly covered with a table napkin and everything necessary for tea. Water was already boiling in the silver kettle over a spirit lamp. Sir Charles filled the teapot and put the tea cozy on. Then he lifted a silver cover from the plate, of which there were a number of slices of bread. By now the spaniel had joined him and was thumping his tail. "Hungry, are you?" said Sir Charles. "Well, we've a good fire for our toast." Then he put a slice of bread on a toasting fork. It was no ordinary toasting fork, for it was made of iron and nearly 4 feet long. It was really meant for pushing logs into a position, but it was just what Sir Charles needed, and he handled it with great skill, avoiding the flaming logs and toasting the bread where the wood glowed red hot. A slice of toast was ready in no time. Sir Charles buttered it thickly and offered a piece to the spaniel, who ate it while Sir Charles watched. Mrs. was a little surprised that the courteous spaniel had not offered her the first piece. She was even more surprised when he received a second piece and ate that too, while Sir Charles watched. She began to feel very hungry and very anxious. Surely this kind spaniel had not invited them to tea just to watch him eat. Then a third piece of toast was offered, and this time Sir Charles happened to turn away. Instantly the spaniel dropped the toast behind the screen. Piece after piece traveled this way to Pongo and Mrs., with the spaniel only eating one every now and then, when Sir Charles happened to be looking. Mrs. felt ashamed of her hungry suspicions. "Never known you with such a good appetite, my boy," said the old gentleman delightedly, and he made a slice after slice of toast until the bread was gone. Then cakes were handed out in the same way, and Sir Charles offered the Spanish a silver bowl of tea. This was put down so close to the edge of the screen that Pongo and Mrs. were able to drink some while Sir Charles was looking the other way. When he saw the bowl empty, he filled it again and again so everyone had enough. Pongo and Mrs. had always had splendid food, but they had never before had hot buttered toast and sweet milky tea. It was a meal they will always remember. At last Sir Charles rose stiffly, put another log in the fire, and then settled back into his chair and closed his eyes. Soon he was asleep, and the spaniel beckoned Pongo and Mrs. to the fire. They sat on the warm hearth and looked up at the old gentleman. His face was deeply lined, and all the lines drooped, and somehow he had the look of the spaniel. Or the spaniel had the look of Sir Charles. Both of them were lit by the firelight, and beyond them was a great window, now blue with the evening. "We ought to be on our way," whispered Pongo to Mrs. But it was so warm, so quiet, they were both so full of buttered toast that they had drifted into a light and delightful sleep. Pongo awoke with a start. Surely someone had spoken his name. The fire was no longer blazing brightly, and there was still enough light to see the old gentleman was awake and leaning forward. "Well, if that isn't Pongo and his missus," he murmured smilingly. Well, what a pleasure, what a pleasure." Mrs. had opened her eyes now. The spaniel whispered, "Don't move, either of you." "Can you see them?" said the old gentleman, putting his hand on the spaniel's head. "If you can, don't be frightened. They won't hurt you. You'd have liked them. Let's see, they must have died 50 years before you were born, or more than that. They were the first dogs I ever knew. I used to ask my mother to stop the carriage and let them get inside. I couldn't bear to see them running behind. So in the end, they just became house dogs. How often they sat there in the firelight. Hey, you two, if dogs can come back, why haven't you come back before?" Then Pongo knew that Sir Charles thought they were ghost dogs, and he remembered that Mr. Dearly had named him Pongo because it was a name given to many Dalmatians of those earlier days when they ran behind carriages. Sir Charles had taken him and Mrs. for Dalmatians he had known in his childhood. "Probably my fault," the old gentleman went on. "I've never been what they call psychic nowadays. This house is supposed to be full of ghosts, but I've never seen any. I dare say I'm only seeing you because I'm pretty close to the edge now. And quite time, too. I'm more than ready. Well, what a joy to know that dogs go on, too. I have always hoped it. Good news for you, too, my boy." He fondled the spaniel's ear. "Well, Pongo and his pretty wife, after all these years, can't see you so well now, but I shall remember." The fire was sinking lower and lower. They could no longer see the old gentleman's face, but soon his even breathing told them he was asleep again. The spaniel rose quietly. "Come with me now," he whispered, "for John will be back soon to get supper. You have given my dear old pet a great pleasure. I am deeply grateful." They tiptoed out of the vast dark hall and made their way to the kitchen, where the spaniel pressed more food on them. "Just a few substantial biscuits. My tin is always left open for me when John is away." Then they had the last drink of water, and the spaniel gave Pongo directions for reaching Suffolk. They were full of rights and lefts, and Mrs. did not take in one word. The spaniel noticed her dazed look, said playfully, "Now, which is your right paw?" "One of the front ones," said Mrs. brightly, at which the Pongo and the spaniel laughed in a very masculine way. Then they thanked the spaniel and said goodbye. Mrs. said she would always remember that day. "So shall I," said the spaniel, smiling at her. "Ah, Pongo, what a lucky dog you are." "I know it," said Pongo, looking proudly at Mrs. Then they were off. After they had been running across the field for some minutes, Mrs. asked anxiously, "How's your leg, Pongo?" "Much, much better." "Oh, Mrs., I'm ashamed of myself. I made such a fuss this morning." "It was partly rage. Pain hurts more when one is angry. You were such a comfort to me and so brave. And you were a comfort to me in the night we left London," said Mrs. "It will be all right as long as we never lose courage both together. I'm glad you did not let me bite that small human." "Nothing should ever make a dog bite a human," said Mrs. in a virtuous voice. Pongo remembered something. You said only the night before last that you were going to tear Cruella de Vil to pieces. That's different, said Mrs. Grimley. I do not consider Cruella de Vil is human. Thinking of Cruella made them anxious for the puppies, and they ran on faster, without talking any more for a long time. Then Mrs. said, Pongo, how far away from the puppies are we now? With good luck, we should reach them tomorrow morning, said Pongo. Just before midnight, they came to the market of Sudbury. Pongo paused as they crossed the bridge over the river Stour. Here we enter Suffolk, he said triumphantly. They ran through the quiet streets of old houses and into the market square. They had hoped they might meet some dog or hear if any news of the puppies had come in the twilight barking, but not so much as a cat was stirring. While they were drinking at a fountain, church clocks began to strike midnight. Mrs. said gladly, Oh, Pongo, it's tomorrow. Now we shall be with our puppies today. And that's the end of that chapter. So, I am at the river. There are some ladies right over here that are talking a whole lot. And I had read the previous chapter started somewhere else, and you might find that I am going to finish that in another location because my phone overheated and had to get started again. So again, I hope you are enjoying the story of 101 Dalmatians, and you know that it is slightly different than the movie, and certainly different than the play that you guys were in. So, and if you're watching this and you're not in the play, that's okay too. All right. So I hope you're enjoying this, and we'll get into chapter. I believe it will be chapter 9 or 10. I don't know which one it is. At another location. So have a great day.
The curl of her lips, the ice in her stare, all innocent children had better beware. She's like a spider waiting for the kill. Cruella